She came home and said, I don't want to eat meat anymore.
Anything that is tied too tightly, that actually tempts you to break through exactly that tightness. For me, you were always the great nutrition scientist.
It's a lifelong process, and anyone who resists it is poorly advised. None of us touched a piece, none of us ate it, no one wanted to eat it.
Today, I'm actually sitting across from a living legend. I'm so happy that you're here. Professor Dr. Klaus Leitzmann. Klaus, you already received this title, this honor, back in 2013. And that was because you did a lot of research in the field of nutritional science. So this Living Legend Award was given to you by the International Union of Nutritional Science. And you can kind of imagine it like a star you get on the Walk of Fame in Hollywood. How does it feel for you to be a living legend?
Yes, of course, it's a great joy that the colleagues who, of course, decide who should be honored, that you are then honored. And actually, it's already comparable to those Lifetime Achievement Awards. Of course, I was really happy that they chose me for it.
Do people still talk to you about it often now? It's been quite a while. It's been 11 years.
Yes, every now and then. Some people are unaware, but others mention it occasionally. But that's just how it is. You even get used to it and think, well, that's just how it was.
You receive this award when you reach your 80th birthday. So I just revealed your age. Was that okay?
Yes, that's no secret. I turned 19 2 weeks ago. Oh, no, I mean 91.
Oh, really? You did a lot of things, right? We'll come back to that later. Now, first of all, let's talk about your outstanding work in the field of nutrition. I still remember that we once had a conversation that you actually started out in the field of nutritional science for nutritional ecology. Am I remembering correctly that the term comes from you? And what does it mean?
Yes, the term itself came a bit later when I returned to Germany. I was confronted with the topic of whole food nutrition, and that was our main focus at first. It fascinated me because it didn't just consider health, but also developed a holistic concept beyond that. So it's not just about health, but also about ecology, meaning the environment, which we hear a lot about today. But it's also about social aspects and economic aspects, and ultimately also about the topic of ethics. All of this, in summary, is whole food nutrition. And from this diet, we later had the idea that the term whole food nutrition doesn't really convey it properly and is also difficult to communicate internationally. And that's why this term came up. One day it occurred to me, why not nutritional ecology? Which, however, is also not ideal because when you hear ecology, you only think of the environment. And it's precisely this comprehensive project. At least it has become established. That was a bit later. That was in 1986 when I came up with this term. And under this term, we also published a lot, wrote books, made publications, and so on.
So how many books have you published, do you happen to know?
Not by chance, but around 50. No, sorry, that's completely wrong. Around 40.
Around 40?
You really should.
That's plenty after all.
Not overdo it.
Klaus, you're a nutritionist, you're a biochemist, you're a microbiologist, and you really stand for whole food nutrition. You know, I'm a vegan. So how is that for you now? Whole foods, vegetarian, vegan? Do we need to deal with this topic a little bit? You and me? Are there big differences between you and me?
Yes. Actually, this whole foods diet is really well planned because it's actually a pretty normal diet. Normal in the sense that you eat what I learned as a child, for example. So you mostly eat plant-based foods, and then once, in exceptional cases, maybe twice a week, you have meat. You also eat dairy products and fish, but all in very small amounts. That's actually the original whole food diet, which we didn't invent. We adopted it from those wonderful pioneers. First and foremost, Bircher Benner, a long time ago. Later, it was Kollath who also conducted important studies to provide scientific evidence for it, and then my colleague Brucker in Lahnstein, who advocated for whole food nutrition, with great success, by the way.
How is it for you? Are you a vegetarian? Or do you eat vegan? Or is it okay to have an egg or maybe a piece of meat sometimes? Or which way do you tend to lean?
Yes, maybe I can elaborate a little on that.
Yes, you can elaborate.
Yes, as a family, we decided in the year 1975 to 76 to live as vegetarians, and the idea came from our youngest daughter. She came home and said, "From today on, I don't want to eat meat anymore." And of course, she expected a lot of resistance, especially from her brothers. But we discussed it calmly, and she presented her arguments, and her main argument was, if we eat a lot of meat, then people in Africa have to go hungry. This connection that our diet also has an impact on other people is becoming increasingly clear. How we behave and how it affects others. And that made perfect sense to me right away. And we lived in Asia for a long time. That's where we actually got to know vegetarianism, but we never really practiced it. Then of course the kids were interested. So how long are we going to do this? Especially the boys. We have 2 sons and 2 daughters who were interested and asked, do we want to do this for a week or even longer? And then I said, there's no point in that. We really have to plan for a longer period of time. I suggest we do it for a year. And in fact, we actually managed to keep it up for a year, which wasn't that difficult. Because with this whole food diet, with 1 meat meal per week, we were already well prepared. But it was hardest for my wife, since she also had to prepare the vegetarian meals. And she learned a lot. Above all, she did a lot of research. Back then, there were only a few people who practiced it, but she took courses on vegetarian nutrition and became really good at it. And after just 1 year, we were fully into it.
And you stayed with it?
Yes, after 1 year. My wife remembered exactly which day it started. I hadn't even thought about it. She sets out a big plate with chicken or chicken meat. I said, yes, the year's over. She was really happy that she could cook differently again now. None of us touched a piece. None of us ate it. None of us wanted to eat it. And we all actually stayed vegetarian.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and the girls, the daughters, they kept it up. They're still doing it today. Some of them are strictly vegan, and they're raising their kids that way too. It's always like that with the boys. At some point they get married, and then it just happens that if it's a woman they marry, she ends up taking over the kitchen. They know that it's sensible to do something like that, but they don't practice it consistently. But you asked how I eat, and it really was an evolution. At first, I was vegetarian, and of course, there were already vegans, who were still very rare back then. But it became increasingly clear that it's better to go in that direction. And then I did it. Planned, but also simply. It just happened that I almost became a vegan, and that's still the case today. And I always call myself a 95% vegan, with the argument that still makes sense to me. If you demand someone to eat 100% vegan, most people shut down and don't want to hear about it. But if you say, you can make exceptions. So it's not a big deal if you eat a piece of cheese once in a while, or if there's an egg in some cake. That makes it a lot easier, and that's how I do it today. So,
That also really reminds me of Roland. He always says that too. He says he's 95% vegan, just like you. And I think that's totally, totally fine. I think that's fine for me too. I mean, I try to live 100% vegan, but it's definitely okay. And I think also important that others, people have a little bit of leeway, because anything that's too tightly restricted actually tempts people to break through exactly those restrictions. And because of that, I think that's very good. And when I look at you, I think, my goodness, you've already done a lot of things right in your life.
yes, I wouldn't directly disagree with that.
Is there anything you've done wrong?
We all make mistakes too.
Is there something that comes to your mind right now, spontaneously?
In terms of nutrition?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I sometimes ate too much cheese, but that's mainly why. My wife was the real cheese lover, and she kept eating cheese all the time. And when it's on the table, it's tempting, you just go along with it. But I think most of the time I stayed within that range, about 95%.
Yeah, well, we had veg. I think I have to tell this because we've known each other for a really, really long time. We know each other over 30 years, I would say.
Yeah, over 30 years.
Definitely. And yes, for me, you were always the great nutritionist, and that was really wonderful because you always encouraged me in what I did. And I remember that at the beginning, we did have quite a few discussions with each other because you said that dairy products are actually very useful for nutrition. How would you comment on that nowadays?
Yes, of course, there are now new findings about how good or not so good milk actually is. And I'd like to refer to my colleague Bodo Melnick, who has been dealing with the disadvantages of milk consumption for decades. And by now, there are so many important scientifically proven studies that show the less dairy products, the better. It's very clear, and internationally we've already come quite a long way in this regard. For example, 1 or 2 years ago, the Canadian government introduced this, that there is no more school milk, as they call it, in schools, based on the findings that milk is not necessarily beneficial to health.
Yes, super, super interesting. And what I also really like is that you are able to reconsider an opinion you may have once held and put it into perspective. When science simply comes to a different conclusion. And that's something I always find so great about people who are a bit older. I'm about to be one of them myself, but that they are actually able to see things and then change them. And I think that's what people call wisdom. And I think by now you have a really big portion of that. And how does it feel when people see you that way? Because I definitely do that.
Well, wisdom is of course a big word. I'm a bit careful with that. Most of the time I answer it very carefully and say, we've become more cautious because we know what dangers there can be. But of course, it's a lifelong learning process, and anyone who doesn't go along with it is really poorly advised. Times change, conditions change, we gain new insights, and we have to accept and implement them, even if it's a bit difficult. Someone who changes their opinion daily may appear untrustworthy. And that was always important to me as well, that what is most important for us as scientists is credibility. If people see that one day you say this and that, and the next day something else, or if you let yourself be influenced by some sponsors, which unfortunately also happens again and again in science, then you've lost your credibility, and then you can say whatever you want. Then people think, well, yesterday he said this, and now he's writing an expert report for some company. That can't be true, and it has to be consistent. Or also in the statements overall, I'd like to Can I give you an example?
Yes, of course.
So, I have a colleague who was a fanatic about raw food. She said, we should only eat raw food from now on. And even back then, I said, raw food is great. We should eat it. As much of it as possible, but only as much as we can tolerate, because the digestibility of raw food varies greatly. Some people, and I include myself in that, can do 100% raw food, but I don't do it because it gets boring. But others can't tolerate it. They have to dose it carefully or get used to it patiently. I mean, we're equipped to process raw food well. That's our past. And that's why it's good that today, many things I've said before, for which I was also criticized, that I said them. As I mentioned before, raw food is good, but it's really up to each individual. He has to decide for himself, and I still have exactly the same opinion today. And in other areas, you mentioned the example of milk. I used to be completely convinced that milk is just ideal. Look at breast milk. It nourishes the living being, and all it needs is milk.
Exactly, that's why, breast milk.
Yeah, I always compare that with cattle. The cows that stand in the fields, they only eat grass, and they synthesize everything they need. And it doesn't have to be animal-based, what you take in. I mean, I always think of those big animals, the bulls and the elephants and the giraffes, all 100% vegan. Look at their muscles. Look at how strong they are. And above all, they all live much longer than the meat-eating animals, like lions, which are like cats, or dogs or wolves. Whatever you want to choose. They live 15, 20, maybe even 25 years. And the elephants and giraffes easily live 50, 60 years. You can still mention the turtles. They live a few hundred years, and they're all vegetarians. Meat eaters die early.
The two of us have written 2 books together, one called Straight Talk Nutrition and the other Straight Talk Weight Loss. By the way, they were really well received, especially Straight Talk Nutrition. That's kind of, at least for me, a little bit true. It's like a life's work where everything is included, and writing it together with you was truly a great joy for me. And in these books, we wrote about why a plant-based diet is so healthy, and we really put all our knowledge into them. But still, one question kept coming up, and it always pops up somewhere in between for so many people. Why do you think is it so hard for people? Do you think it's hard for people to decide or not decide to eat healthy? Why is that?
Yes, of course, there are a whole range of reasons for that. Let's maybe start with tradition. Tradition in families that have always eaten certain meals or foods. That's something you've learned from childhood and the formative time, especially for nutrition, which also lasts a long time as youth. So even in childhood, and that's why it's a shame that not much more is done in early childhood in this area today. They do it in other areas, but not in the area of nutrition. And so that would be a reason to break these family traditions. And overall, it's also the culture. We know that people in different cultures eat differently, and many of them are healthy as well. But we also know when you compare, for example, the Mediterranean diet or Asian diets, that they are clearly much healthier, where people live longer and, above all, live healthier for a longer time. And in places where more meat is eaten, there are these lifestyle diseases which end up being incredibly expensive overall. They occur much more frequently. So those are already reasons why you should eat a plant-based diet.
I really hope that someday healthy nutrition will simply be taught in schools. And I really do hope so, because I think it's about time. We can see how sick people are getting and how our healthcare system is burdened because of it. It's just absolute madness. Dear Klaus, now I would like to learn a bit more about you.
Oh,
About your oh so exciting life. I know one thing that you told me once, and actually you wanted to do something with sports.
that's right.
But I mean, you're super athletic. You move a lot. That's not an issue at all. But you didn't become an athlete. You became a professor of nutritional science, biochemistry, microbiology, and so on and so forth. How, please, did you get there?
How many hours do we have?
Well, I'll try to guide you. Yes, I'll ask in the meantime.
Do that.
Okay, just start now.
Yeah, I think I was pretty talented as an athlete when I was a kid. I even skipped a grade in my early school years and was always the youngest in my class. And when it came to sports, and back then the sports were still very simple. So whenever we did sports, there were always 3 disciplines: long jump, ball throwing, and the 100-meter dash. Those were the standard disciplines. And even though I was the youngest, I was the best in all 3 disciplines. And of course, that motivated me. I thought, yeah, being an athlete is great. Maybe the Olympics and so on. You know, you have those kinds of fantasies. But that faded away after a while, because I also lived in a time that wasn't so favorable. When I see today what opportunities my children had, now I have grandchildren, and I've even become a great-grandfather. And I also hope for my great-grandchildren that they will still have such good conditions, because we really lived very simply and actually under marginal conditions. Yes, so I lived 6 years before the Second World War, and I was malnourished. I had a vitamin D deficiency, rickets, quite clearly, because people simply didn't pay attention. Back then, there was already cod liver oil that people were given. You only need very small amounts of vitamin D, but if you don't get any at all, if you're one of 3 children, at some point the mother doesn't have enough in her milk anymore, and then something like that breaks out. And then came the 6 years of war. That was not a good time. I don't need to go into the details. Then came the 6 post-war years, and I was 18. And my childhood was actually a disaster compared to the opportunities and the situation people have today. So it was just, we had to on top of that, my father was in the war. My mother was almost blind. We children, there were 3 of us, had to do everything.
Where are you actually from?
I'm from the Lüneburg area, from the Lüneburg Heath, and just saying Lüneburg Heath already says something about the possibilities of living well or not so well. The heath consists of sandy soils, and sandy soils usually only yield, well, moderate harvests. The soil is nowhere near as fertile as clay soils or other types of soil, at least. It was like this. As children, we already learned how to cook, bake, and do the laundry. We still used the washboard. There were no washing machines. We learned to iron and garden. So everything that had to be done we did as children. But back then we didn't see it as a burden at all. All the children were like that. Still, compared to today, it was of course a pretty simple. And yes, it didn't offer so many opportunities, and that shaped us. And maybe I can say that my wife, in her last years of life, she needed care. And she didn't want any care from outside. And it wasn't difficult for me at all, even when she was already at care level 3, to take care of everything. I could cook, I could do the laundry, and I could iron and wash the dishes. And to take care of a sick wife, it wasn't hard for me. On the contrary, I owe a lot to my wife because she supported me my whole life so that I could pursue my career. Fortunately, it wasn't hard for her because she always said, I have 4 children, I want to be a mother, I will stay at home. I don't have to earn money myself. And that's why I was very lucky there. Let's put it that way.
I think so too. And you also knew what you had to do. You owe that to your childhood, but childhood ended at some point. You graduated from school.
Yes.
What level was this school's graduation?
Yes, she went to middle school.
Middle school, then what?
Yes, well, although by the way, I was the top student in my class on our graduation certificate, but back then it was still like that. Maybe it's still a bit like that today. In German schools, it's frowned upon to be a conscientious student. That's likely decreased a lot. So you were quickly called a nerd, and that was a really bad word for someone who did their schoolwork conscientiously. So I was always interested in that, but it was really hard to get an apprenticeship. For jobs, it was because many of the 16 and 17-year-olds, some even 17, were still drafted into the military during the last years of the war. Sadly, many died, though many returned. Still, some things were denied to them because they were able to graduate from high school, to get their Abitur, and they were given priority not only in school, so they could make up their graduation, but also for apprenticeships. And for me, an apprenticeship was found as a gardener, and then I learned to be a gardener. I also enjoyed that, and later in my life, I was always grateful for that because unlike many of my colleagues, I knew exactly what kinds of plants there are, how they are propagated, how they are planted, grafted, pruned, and so on. So I later considered it a great stroke of luck that I did that.
This gardening apprenticeship lasted 5 years, correct?
No, it lasted the usual 3 years.
3 years.
3 years, but I did take my exam.
Yes.
Normally, I could have done it in just 2.5 years. They said you can take the exam now.
Yes.
I also passed it with very good marks, just by the way. In my last year of apprenticeship in Germany, that was 1951, there was the first Federal Garden Exhibition in Hanover, and there was a competition for apprentice gardeners from all over Germany, and I took part in it. Yes, I won it and was then Germany's best apprentice gardener. That was nice.
I can imagine. And how did things go from there? It's quite a journey from gardener to professor.
Yes, it's a long journey, and it keeps taking some really sharp turns. Each time it was linked to what seemed like luck, not coincidence, since coincidences don't really exist. And I'm very grateful for that many people helped me and showed me new opportunities for what I could do. Because in any case, the plan was very clear. Back then, in order to study landscape architecture, which was my goal to study landscape architecture, you needed 5 years of traveling experience after completing your apprenticeship. You had to...
Years of traveling. Oh my goodness.
That's hardly done anymore these days. Some people still do it, but barely anyone.
Carpenters, I think, right?
Yeah, the carpenters are most likely to do it. You sometimes see them, or they travel for 3 years.
5 years?
5 years.
Did you do it?
Of course, I did everything. And then it was smart to work in different companies. I spent a year in Bad Tölz, where I worked at a nursery that grew flowers, but also planted vegetables and so on, primarily for a hospital. Then I spent a year in Hamburg at one of the largest solitary plant nurseries in Europe, which still exists today. Lorenz von Ehren. Anyone who hears that, some of you might have heard it before. There you learned a lot about trees, pruning, grafting, and so on. Then I spent a year in Cologne at a perennial nursery, where they only had perennials. And afterwards, I spent over 2 years in Switzerland to learn landscape gardening, where you learned how to design gardens with paths, where to place plants, and whether a swimming pool is planned or a tea house, and so on. And then it has to be planted accordingly. Of course, we didn't plan for that. When the 5 years were up...
What happened? Yes?
Yes, I had already signed up by then. Back then, there were only 2 horticultural colleges in Germany, one in Osnabrück and one in Weihenstephan. And as a North German, I chose Osnabrück. And then, but in the meantime, I had made contact with America. We had a distant relative there, and that's how it was back then. To emigrate to America, you needed a sponsor who was then responsible for making sure you didn't kill anyone there, so to speak, that you behaved properly or at least conducted yourself appropriately. Because what we know here as a welfare state, support, and so on, nothing. That's still the case today. In America, with a few exceptions.
Did you always want to go to America?
Somehow, yes, somehow. That's just how it was at the time. That's how it was. I still remember when I traveled from northern Germany to Bavaria. Bavaria, that was like a trip around the world back then. Really unbelievable. Bavaria, that's really far away, yeah. And with America, of course, it was even more dramatic. America, the land of unlimited opportunities. And back then, I had the naive idea that if I didn't make it there now, once I'm married and start a family, I'll never get to America. You just can't afford that at all. You just couldn't imagine how everything would develop. But that's a really long story, which I want to make very short.
But I want to know, absolutely.
Yes, well, it was like this. I already knew my wife. We were young and in love, and I wanted to go to America. And she didn't want to. She really didn't want to.
She didn't want to go to America?
Not at all. She resisted with all her might. I had to be very persuasive to convince her that it would be a good idea. In the end, we found a compromise.
That was there?
We will stay for a year.
Okay, now it's getting exciting.
Yes, that helped. And but before that, before we set off at the age of 22, we then decided that we would get married before we got married, and a week later we were on the ship. So that was our honeymoon, 13 days at sea. Today you can make the trip in 5 days. It was such an old barge. The Berlin, I don't think it even exists anymore. The Berlin, that was a disaster. Force 11 winds in April, and my wife was seasick for 14 out of 13 days. She was just seasick the whole time. And even back then, I decided never to go on a honeymoon again.
Never go on a honeymoon again?
That was a disaster.
Or never go on a honeymoon at sea again?
Yes, that. Anyway, we finally reached America. And this distant relative. He was a professor at a university in Columbus, Ohio, where we arrived, and he took very good care of us. We arrived there without any money, so how naive can you be? But we had just enough money to buy the ship tickets, which wasn't easy at all back then. Well, anyway, he took care of us. And then one day he said to me, I had already taken on some gardening work and was already earning money. You have to start somewhere. And I quickly realized that I could make something out of it, and I also trusted myself to start my own business. I'm sure I could have turned it into a big horticultural business if I had trusted myself, but that's just not how it turned out. He said, yeah, Klaus, wouldn't you like to go to college? I said, college? I can't. I don't even have a high school diploma. Yeah, he said, we can see how we can make that work. So we went to the administration and asked about it. He wasn't completely sure how it worked either. And they said, well, we do need some kind of documentation, but since I was already a bit older, I wasn't 18 anymore, so I was allowed to take an exam, and then that exam. That's the minimum requirement. You must pass it. But of course, my English wasn't good. Then I took the exam, and I was very surprised that I passed it. So I was able to start studying, and my idea was actually to do a year or a semester to properly learn English. But then you're asked, what do you want to study? Physics, chemistry, biology, music, theology, everything was on offer. Some tried to persuade me to study theology, but that.
What did you study? Probably something that was close to your heart, or
Sorry?
something that was close to your heart.
Of course, I said I'm studying botany.
Makes sense.
There wasn't even botany.
There wasn't any?
No, botany as a subject wasn't offered, so it was just biology. There, you didn't just deal with plants, but also with animals and all of physiology.
What happened with that one semester?
Well, after one semester, our first child was born, so we became a family. And then, of course, things got difficult, you know.
Does that mean you worked?
Of course.
You studied.
Yes.
The language was then somewhat manageable.
Yes, it did.
And the first child came. And Ile, your wife?
She'd found a job at a bank. That's what she did in Germany, too. But she earned so little that if you put your child in care in another family, it costs just as much as she earned. We still did it for a while because it was also very good for her. She learned more English, made contacts, got to know people, and so on. But when the second child came, pretty soon after, it really wasn't worth it anymore. And then she stayed at home. But that meant I had to work a lot. Well, I can't remember ever really having a weekend off. Weekends were when it was most likely. I often worked 9, 10, or 11 hours instead of 8, sometimes on Sundays and as many afternoons as possible during the week. Because we had rent to pay, a family to support, and tuition fees.
That's right. They still exist in America.
Oh yes, they're definitely not cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how long did you study then? What happened during that time?
Yeah.
Happened?
Normally, you study for 4 years to get your bachelor's degree.
Yes.
But it took me 5 years, simply because I had to work so much that I couldn't keep up with or fulfill the workload.
And what were you after your degree program?
I actually completed it after the second year of the degree program. I wanted to. As biologists, we also had to take courses in chemistry, of course.
Yes, yes.
That was part of it. And suddenly I thought chemistry is something great. It really interested me. And then I switched from biology to chemistry and got my bachelor's degree in chemistry. I got my bachelor's degree in chemistry. And then due to some lucky coincidences, well, there are no coincidences, but due to some
Who knows?
circumstances that came my way, an offer came from the University of Minnesota. They were actively looking for students who had studied natural sciences to continue their studies. And so I went to Minnesota, and there I had an income for the first time of $200 a month. And back then, the dollar was still worth so much that you could actually rent an apartment for $200, support a family, and cover all expenses.
How big was your family back then?
Oh, yes, by then there were 6 of us. So after our 2 sons, we had 2 daughters. Yes.
And Illa went through all of that too?
Surprisingly, yes. She actually had what she always wanted to be and to have. She wanted to have many children. If I may add that, I don't know if that's really interesting. When we seriously talked about getting married, she said she wanted to have at least 10 children. Yes, and of course that was... Take 3 deep breaths, say wonderful, and consider it might not end that way.
Like I am now.
Then you say wonderful, and then you think, well, maybe it won't turn out that way after all.
But she was happy with just the 4 of them, right?
Yes, especially. Not all children are easy. The first children were easy, and the others were a bit more difficult. And after 4, she also said, yes, that's enough. She was happy with that.
Good. How did it go on? It went on.
It went on. I then studied in Minnesota in microbiology, actually got my master's in microbiology, also a highly interesting field. I mean, we went from Pasteur to the discovery that viruses exist. That was actually only discovered during my time as a student, that something like that even exists. Back then, they were still called phages. There wasn't even a proper word for them yet, not a proper one. And then everything happened very quickly. I found that very exciting, and then I was lucky again after my... Well, I then stayed in Minnesota and basically combined these fields of knowledge, continued studying biochemistry, and then earned my doctorate in biochemistry, so that's my academic degree.
Okay.
Then another stroke of luck came along, an offer from California that I could work in a lab there with a Nobel Prize winner, and that was super exciting. I learned a lot there, including how to do research. And we were there for 2 years. Then, by chance again, came an offer to go to Thailand. My boss was very well known. You might not know him. Maybe many others don't either. The biochemist was named Paul Boyer, I know, who won the Nobel Prize. He went on a world trip, and among other places, he was in Thailand. And then they were looking for lecturers for a new university that the Rockefeller Foundation built in Bangkok, fully funded. And to get this university up and running, they tried to recruit young scientists for all the medical faculties to teach their subjects. So I taught biochemistry to medical students there for 2 years, and there were quite a lot of them. So he talked to all of us, Boyer in our lab, and during the weekly meeting he said, yes, I was in Thailand and they're looking for someone. Let me know by tomorrow who would like to go there, and we did. We were all excited and said, great, going to Asia now, that would be something. And I was actually the least likely candidate. I was married, had 4 children, that was already something big, then going so far away and with kids. And he said, let me know by tomorrow, whoever is really interested in it. They're waiting for it, they want to know. And the next morning we got together again. Maybe it was the morning after that. Then he said, well, so how is it? Who wants to go? And then some said, yeah, I would like to go. But my wife just got pregnant. And the next one said, yeah, I would like to go too. We made a down payment on a house, and in the end I was the only one left. And then he says to me, how about you, Klaus? And I said, yes, I'm ready to go.
And then you packed everything and went to Thailand. Within what time frame, please?
Yes, maybe I can just mention that briefly. I had already told that.
Yes.
Listen, off for Thailand. Well, I think I didn't have any chance at all. We were 12 or 15 research assistants in a lab. So I said, yeah, we don't have any chance, but it sounds very interesting. And the next day I found out that I was the only one, and then I immediately agreed, and then I called my wife, a memorable phone call. A phone call that's still memorable for me, one that maybe many people wouldn't have. I called home on the phone, then I said, hello, honey. I always called her honey, like honey, honey.
Yes.
Honey, then I said. I'll say it in English too, because I think everyone will understand. Guess where we are going next year? So where are we going next year? And then she said, where are we going? And then I said to Thailand, and then she said, wonderful. That was our shortest phone call.
Oh, how lovely.
Shortest phone call.
How lovely.
About a very important decision about our future. And then we packed our things and went to Thailand with our 4 children. They were between 3 and 10 years old. No, actually, between 3 and 8.
And you were in Thailand for 2 years?
Yes. No, not in Thailand. I spent 2 years in Bangkok.
Also at this university.
From this new university, which still exists today.
Yes.
And that really was one of the truly successful development projects. So much development aid has been poured into all sorts of things. After 10 years, nothing was left. Unfortunately, you had to say a lot of money was invested, but nothing sustainable came out of it. And today, this university is one of the leading universities in Thailand. Mahidol University, that's what it's called, also has a good reputation and still exists. But my contract expired after 2 years because then the Rockefeller Foundation handled that very cleverly. They sent young Thai people abroad to Australia, to England, to America. They trained them there and said, you will be trained so that you can return to your home country and take over these positions. And when I was in Los Angeles, I met a young Thai man, and I then talked with him and asked what he does and what he's up to, and he said he is funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, And when he finishes his training, he will go back to Bangkok. And lo and behold, I was practically the first one there, and my contract expired after 2 years. And then he came. That's when we saw each other again.
So it was also smart development aid. Definitely there were a lot of mistakes that were made, but that was a really good one. Okay, so your time in Bangkok was over then.
Yes, it took 2 years, but we did a few things in the meantime. In Thailand, we explored the country, visited nearby countries, and spent time in the city's north. And there was an institute there which was affiliated with the hospital that dealt with malnutrition and anemia, especially for children. And lo and behold, they were looking for someone to run the laboratory where the tests were conducted. Blood tests, stool tests, saliva tests, everything that can be examined. And they had heard about me, that I was in Bangkok, and they offered me the position to run the laboratory there. And then we thought about it for a moment, Ile and I, my wife and I, and then we said, great, let's do it. So off to Chiang Mai, 800 kilometers further north. And that was, yes, maybe even the best time of our lives, for all of us.
Why?
Above all, because the children liked it so much there. There was a missionary school there, and it had wonderful teachers. And that's a rural area. It's not quite as hot and humid as in Bangkok. It's already a bit on the mountain slopes there. Great climate, really nice people. We were all young and healthy. It was wonderful.
How long were you there?
3 years.
And then?
Then, in the meantime, I had met someone who shows up in Thailand, in Bangkok, the one who founded the Institute of Nutritional Science in Gießen, Professor Kramer, and he gave a lecture. And I went there, listened to it, and then it just happened that way, because I was German now. I think I approached him, and then he asked me, what will you do when you finish your project here? I replied, we haven't decided yet. My wife really wants to go back to Germany. I got an offer to return to Los Angeles. It's not completely decided yet, but maybe we'll go to Germany. And he said, well, if you come, then come to Gießen sometime. Maybe you'll like it there. But then I thought Gießen might be a bit one-sided. I'll apply somewhere else. And then I applied for biochemistry, because that was actually my main focus. I applied to the biochemists in Freiburg, and because I was a microbiologist, I applied to Professor Schlegel in Göttingen. Schlegel, does that still matter to you?
Yes.
I believe he wrote the main microbiology textbook for medical students. And I went there and then did a tour around Germany and gave 3 lectures. In Göttingen for Schlegel, in Gießen for Tremmer, and in Freiburg. And then I went back to Bangkok and waited, and then I received 3 letters and 3 acceptances. Yeah, what do you do then?
Yeah, and why did you choose Gießen?
Mainly I wondered, how will your life continue now? Do you want to spend your whole life as a biochemist in the lab, doing research that might be interesting and valuable? Or do you want to deal with microbes? Also interesting, but probably mostly lab work as well? Or do you want to study nutritional science, where you actually have contact with people when you conduct studies and so on? And that was my first priority, so I accepted in Gießen, but then it was tough to decline in Freiburg and Göttingen, but I had to do it. And I recently looked at the letters again, so I declined, and then received handwritten letters from Professor Schlegel as well as from Freiburg. Dear Mr. Leitzmann, you informed us that you have decided on Gießen. Would you like to reconsider that? I thought that was really great, but back then the situation was also better.
But you didn't regret it?
Not at all. No, I think it was exactly the right thing. And I was able to, I could also, and above all, I could draw on all my experiences. First, being a gardener, working with these plants and foods, and then also having traveled internationally. And also, and that certainly helped with these applications, Back then, it wasn't so common for someone from Germany to be able to speak really good English.
That's true, yes.
That was never said. It was never discussed publicly either. But you could assume that maybe you had a better chance there.
So how was your path in Gießen?
In Gießen, I did. That was a new phase of life, or as people would say today, a turning point. Then it was all about nutrition, but I became interested in international nutrition and pursued that as well. At first, I was a research associate. And then something very interesting happened. A group of students approached me and said, everything we're learning here, it all sounds so dry and old, and we're not that interested in it because we know there are other things that might be more interesting in nutrition. And there's something like whole food nutrition, and we practice that now too. And now we wanted to study this further, but none of the professors are interested in this subject. We talk to everyone. Now we want to talk to you as well. And I said, that sounds very interesting. And they actually, I have to admit, frankly admit, they then put me at the head of their interest group, and I learned a bit from them at first. What does he do and why? And so on. And then we promoted this whole foods nutrition.
Yes, and then you were kind of a rebel at the university where you weren't easygoing. Well, it all sounds so simple and so smooth when you talk about it, but in Gießen, it wasn't that easy for you.
No, that's absolutely right. No, I was a complete outsider. I wasn't publicly singled out, but I did hear a lot of things. By the way, interestingly, in recent years, I've been hearing from my former students and also from the administrative staff who were around us. All the things that were said about me back then and what people wished for me and so on. It wasn't very friendly, to put it very mildly. I wasn't popular with my colleagues.
Why?
Well, simply because I did something that was pure ideology back then. That wasn't scientific, it wasn't academic at all to deal with such a topic. But I immediately realized that it was important, and I always had that feeling. You're at a university, so who pays you? By the taxes of the people who work hard and have to pay their taxes. That's what we were paid with. And I always thought that this also creates an obligation, that you have to give something back to these people. At least that was my philosophy.
That's how it should be, by the way.
And that's why I have many as well. Of course, we've written scientific books, especially for students or for specific topics like nutritional ecology, but also others. But also that we've written books for the consumer.
Yes.
Often, however, it's for intermediaries who are very important. There are people who deal with advising others. These were often also graduates of our degree program who then worked in health insurance companies, government agencies, companies, and so on. But they had direct contact with people who were interested in it. How can you eat better, healthier, and more sustainably now?
Well, that's definitely one reason why you're still at the forefront of nutritional science. And also, as the nutrition pope, you stand for the value of vegetarian and sometimes even vegan nutrition. And I find that extremely fascinating. And until then, first of all, thank you so much for explaining everything in such detail. We have a little surprise for you. We have a box here. I'd like to ask you to take it. Wait a moment, I'll hand it to you.
May I just say a word about what you just mentioned?
Yes.
With the Pope, that's not possible at all. I'm not Catholic.
I'm so sorry. So, look, we brought you a few things here, so go ahead and take them out. Wait, I think I need to go in front of the microphone. So we brought you a few things, so take them out one by one and tell us what comes to your mind.
That looks like a cooking spoon.
It probably is one too.
It's a cooking spoon. Very familiar to me. Yeah, that immediately reminds me that I used to cook even as a child.
Yes.
Very simple things. Mostly what we used to call stew, which was potatoes, vegetables, and if you were lucky, maybe a small piece of meat. And we as children already prepared that for our small family.
What about now that you're on your own? Do you cook for yourself?
Yes, I have also during the last 3.5 years, when my wife was really sick and then at some point she couldn't anymore. She didn't feel like it anymore and didn't want it anymore. And she told me almost every day, I'm so glad you can cook.
I believe that.
And then I cooked. And I actually enjoyed it, because who do you like to cook for the most? Of course, for a person
Sure.
who is very close to you, right?
Yes.
Yes, that was already.
Would you like to take another look?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe like this? What's still in there?
Is a certificate. I hope it's not a bill. Should I open it?
It's meant to be opened.
All right. Is he there? Yeah, Frankie.
Frankie?
Frankie, yeah.
What's up with Frankie? Who is Frankie?
Yeah, that's him.
Frank Elsner?
That's Frank Elsner, whom humanity knows very well.
Definitely yes.
Very well-known man. Frank Elsner called me one day and asked if I would like to write a book with him. I was surprised and thought, wow, that's something new. And he also had the idea to write something for the general public. And he already had a title for the book. He actually suggested Life Goes Through the Stomach. That was a good title, of course. It reminds you of Love Goes Through the Stomach. To be honest, I didn't really like the title because I thought it wouldn't really appeal to people, not that much. I also had another idea, but no, that's how it ended up being done. And it was a lot of fun to make this book with Frank Elsner. We always did interviews together. He came to Laubach, where I lived, and he also ate with us, learned what we eat, or what Ille used to cook back then. My wife?
Yes.
And I have also been to Baden-Baden more often.
Yes.
And he had very diligent employees who recorded and documented everything. And so this book...
So there's still something in there. Can you do that already? What do you have in your hand?
That looks like a hamburger.
Like a hamburger. And what's that all about?
Yeah, I guess it's referring to the fact that I once ate a hamburger in my life.
Did you once?
Yes.
Really? Not anymore?
No, not anymore.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Back then I had the idea in Gießen that as part of our traditional diet, I would invite people who do things a little differently, or who had already started or were a bit further along than we were. Among others, you were there too. You came and talked about your ideas. Very interesting. And then I also had the idea that we shouldn't just present alternative forms of nutrition, but also what most people actually do, which is eat at McDonald's. The others weren't so present yet, but even in Gießen there was a store, a restaurant, McDonald's, and then I wrote to McDonald's Germany. Back then they were based in Munich, and I said I would like a representative from McDonald's to tell us about their restaurant system. And then a lady showed up. I can still remember exactly. Her name was Countess Palfi, of Hungarian descent, as far as I can recall. And I picked her up at the train station. A very tall, impressive figure, very fashionably dressed, beautifully made up, like a movie actress. And then I thought, well, she looks quite pretty. Let's see what she has to say. She gave an excellent lecture.
And did you then recommend hamburgers as a diet afterwards?
Of course. Just for the woman's sake. No, jokes aside, she really represented her company there excellently. But that's how I've always done it. They were allowed to talk for half an hour, and then we had an hour and a half to ask questions. The students were supposed to do that themselves. Why should I tell them how good or bad McDonald's is? They should hear the representatives, ask questions, and decide.
What do you think about fast food today?
Yes, fast food wasn't a good development back then either, because it led to just consuming food. I'll just say that instead of using the word food, because it's not very beneficial to your health, to put it very carefully. And we know the consequences. I mean these modern lifestyle diseases that exist. High blood pressure, high cholesterol levels, cardiovascular diseases, and so on. They don't just come out of nowhere.
Then let's just put him back in the box now.
Okay.
Agreed.
May I tell another story?
Mm-hmm.
Then my daughter, Heidi, who led us to vegetarianism, came and said, "Have you ever been to McDonald's?" And I said, "No." Then she said, "That's pretty weak. You have to go there and check it out in Gießen. I'll invite you. We'll go to McDonald's. And I hope that as many of your students as possible will be there, so they can see that you were there. You have to experience it." And she was absolutely right. And then we went there. I was already a bit impressed, because back then it was all very new for Germany. I already knew it from America. How they did things there, the hygiene, the cleanliness, that really impressed me. And then we ordered a hamburger, which tasted okay, or maybe even tasted good. But it just wasn't the right thing, and not something we would recommend. And that impression never changed, even though today they really make a big effort. They even offer vegan burgers now, so that's, well...
But it's not really that kind of place.
Where we are still those white buns.
Exactly. Dear Klaus, we've really heard so much about your life now, in such a short time, such a long life. I have one last question for you. We dedicated our book, Klartext Ernährung, to our children, their children, and all the children in this world.
That was your idea.
Maybe yes. Is there anything you would like to tell them, maybe in one sentence?
To the children?
To all of them in this world?
To all the children? Yes. I would wish for all the children in this world to have parents and relatives who point out to them that if they don't eat well as children, they might suffer from it for the rest of their lives. It starts with simple things. For example, when children are overweight because they don't eat the right things, the likelihood is very high that they will remain overweight, and those who are overweight are at risk of illness. So that's why I would wish for the environment to be like that. So not just their own behavior, but also the circumstances that they grow up in a situation where they are made aware of it, or where it is demonstrated to them how to eat healthily and sustainably, and not just grow old, but grow old in good health.
Yes, that's a wonderful goal. First of all, thank you so much up to this point, dear Klaus. We have a really nice thing at the end of this podcast. It's called the role reversal. I'm offering you the chance to be the host now, and I'm the one you can ask any question or questions you've always wanted to know. Can you think of anything?
Well, that's not exactly easy. I know you pretty well by now, but there are always questions. Maybe we can just start with the topic we just talked about. What was your childhood like? Did you experience it that way too? That maybe looking back you did experience things that weren't so good? And maybe that also protected you from some things? Or led you to become more sensitive at some point? Or maybe develop intolerances.
Yes, definitely. I know that dairy products weren't good for me, and thankfully I had a foster mother who noticed that. That was when I was at the age where people think the child needs to be well taken care of. That's when milk became such a big thing. I still remember that, and I didn't like it. I couldn't even drink plain milk. It made me feel sick. And on the other hand, there were always these commercials about how important it is. And my mom always tried to do something good for me. And then I got cocoa, and I was able to drink cocoa. Nevertheless, I was always a very sick child. I was always very, very thin. And I didn't want anything from milk except for cocoa. And that's actually why I was sent to a health retreat 3 times when I was a little girl, and it wasn't great at all because there I ended up there because I was malnourished.
Really?
And there was always a lot of milk. But I had such a wonderful mom who knew that I couldn't have it, couldn't tolerate it, and didn't like it. And she gave me a letter. In this letter, it said, "Please understand that Petra cannot tolerate any food with milk. She always feels sick and she throws up." And with that, at least regarding this topic, I already had a really, really good situation for myself, and I am extremely grateful to her. Back then, I had no idea that something like a milk intolerance even existed. I just thought, well, I'm somehow a sick child and yeah, I have to deal with it. But now we know a lot more about it, and that's how it was for me.
Yeah, very interesting. Good.
I think I've never told anyone about this before, about my milk story. It's interesting for me. Yeah.
Yeah, but why not? Do you have a reason for that?
No, not really. I think no one has ever asked me about it.
Yeah, well, good thing I asked you.
Yeah. Can you think of anything else?
Yeah, we could just keep going up the ladder of life now. What made you decide to study medicine?
Well, we'll do that at the end. I'd also like to talk about that again. It's actually this woman who wrote me that letter when I was at the health resort as a little child. When I was 13 or 14, she became very, very ill with heart disease, and she developed severe type 2 diabetes, that is adult onset diabetes. And I simply witnessed how a very strong woman became ill and gradually faded away, even in terms of her personality. And that's when the desire grew in me that one day, yes, I might be able to help these people, especially that I could help my mother. And so I decided to study medicine, and she was still alive then, but she passed away during my first semester of medical school. And when I think about how it used to be with diabetes, my mother was supposed to have 6, 7, 8 small meals a day. Fructose was the sweetener of choice, and now we know how disastrous that is. I know there was a reason she had to die so early, because otherwise I would never have studied medicine.
Ah, yes.
Never. And I also know that I owe it to her that I'm sitting here with you today, that I have all this knowledge with which I try to inform people so that they can live long, healthy lives.
Did you have any other career aspirations before that?
I would have liked to study psychology.
Oh, really?
Yes, that was the alternative, so I was torn between the two. But when my mom was so sick, it was very clear to me. I wanted to gain this knowledge quickly so I could help her. But it's well known that even back then, you didn't learn anything about nutrition in medical school. And that's why I'm so glad we met, because you were always my rock when it came to nutrition. And I also learned a lot. And thank you so, so much for that. And also thank you so, so much for being here today, Klaus.
Yes, my pleasure.
I was extremely happy about it.
Yes, anytime.
Gladly, gladly. Thank you.
Yes, nice.